everybody on mute? Rahul? Hi everyone, we are waiting to join everyone, for all the others to join in. Can you all see the screen?
You're doing it. I see that sign.
Friends, we are waiting for everyone to join for another few minutes. In the meanwhile, we are sharing images of documentation of the biodiversity of RM Mill Colony, which is a green zone adjacent to the Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Bombay. This is about 20 plus years of our documentation. So just to update you that while the speaker speaks, all audience will be on mute. There is a chat button on the base. You can type in your questions and the moderators will pass on the questions to the speaker. These are spiders. mushrooms and fungi and ferns. What we're screening next is are all the scheduled species that are found that have been recorded in the RML colony. You know, there is a long drawn court battle that's going on for the last 5 years, and much of this information has been presented as the documentary evidence for biodiversity, because the environment impact assessment study reported that there is no no biodiversity of any significance found in the RML colony. So this data that we put together over the last 20 plus years, of course, by a lot of people, it's not just one person. You can see the names of all the people who've contributed. It's a crowdsourced data.
So what are the orange, red, and green tags? We can't read what's
The
written.
orange, the red tags mean schedule 1. Orange tag means schedule 2. And green tag means schedule 4.
Okay.
I'd request everyone to type your questions in. This will be, all the audience will be on mute. Questions will be asked through the chat window, and the admin will pass it on to the speaker. We have already with us Dr. Sahas Barve. We'll start in a minute more. There are messages from a few more people that they are joining and they're having some technical issues with joining. Okay, so welcome everyone and a happy Earth Day. Today is the 50th day when the Earth Day, the first Earth Day that was celebrated. And we've come a long way since 1970 when they began the Earth Day. Various kinds of celebrations are done across the world, and today we at Sprouts are celebrating it through a talk by Dr. Sahas Barve. And I'm glad to tell you, I just came to know from Sahas that this is the first time their 50 years of documentation work that they have done in the Smithsonian is being presented to any audience in the world. So you guys will be the first audience to listen about the work that is being done, that has been done for the last 50 years by a huge diversity of scientists and contributors. But before that, I'm pleased to also inform you that 12 years ago, Sprouts ourselves started a venture called the Earth Mela on this very day, 22nd April at the Maharashtra Nature Park. We've done 11 Earth Melas till now, which are nature festivals. And Sprouts has just completed its 25th year on 4th of April 2020. So we have a short presentation about that. Before we start, it's going to be just a few slides. I'd request Amruta to share the presentation. In the meanwhile, there are a few more people joining in. We'll start exactly at 5:40. Also, a request to everyone that please keep yourself on mute. All questions to the speaker There's a chat window. You can share it from there. And this session is going to be recorded. It will end in 20 minutes. We'll please request you to sign in again with the same ID to continue. We'll take a few minutes gap and then we will continue again so that everyone can log in. The same password ID that we've given you, please join the meeting again. Yeah. So Amrita, can you put the presentation on? Nikhil, you'll have to probably switch off your thing and re-log in again. Can others hear us? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Those of you can hear me, can you please give me a thumbs up? Okay, thank you, Padmaja. Thank you, Ram. Mr. Ajit also can. Thank you. Shirish, can you hear me? Milita, Minal. Okay, I can see Pooja and Prathamesh saying yes. Pashmir is saying yes. Mr. Ghate can hear. Pranath Patil from Kanha is also saying he can hear us. Pranath, are you in Kanha or in Tadoba? I think Tadoba. Sorry.
Kana.
Kana. Okay. My bad. Right. So we have participants from Baroda, from MP, a lot from Maharashtra, Kaushik and Milita from West Bengal. Okay, Amrita, can you please share your screen? Amrita, are you there? I think Amrita is having technical issues. Sneha? I think it's time for us to start then. A good morning to Sahas and a good evening to all the others who've signed in from various parts of the country. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. I'm Anand Pendarkar. I'm the founder director of Sprouts. And thanks for joining in from various parts. A very good Earth Day to all of you. And hope you've been good Earth citizens. So welcome, Sahas. It's always, a very happy occasion to have you with us. I'd hand over Sahas to start the presentation and take us through 50 years of research work at the Smithsonian and what your findings have been. So over to you, Sahas.
So can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you will see the presentation. Here we go. Now if I can put it in full screen mode. All right, great. So everyone can see it in full screen mode now? Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Sahas Barve and I have been associated with Sprouts for the last at least 14 years, if not longer. And I'm really honored to be invited by Anand to give this seminar. And I work at the Smithsonian right now, but actually a lot of the work that I'm going to be presenting actually happened at the University of California, Berkeley. And I'll tell you more about that. But basically what I'm going to talk about is instead of taking a big approach about a global approach in what we have learned from studying animals and birds and plants around the world, I'm going to talk about studying the same birds in the same place for 50 years and what that tells us about how we have evolved as a social animal. So a little bit about myself before we dive in. This is my contribution for the Me at 20 challenge. I grew up in Mumbai, just like many of you guys. I was a naturalist, walking around in Tungareshwar and Sanjay Gandhi National Park and Arimil Colony. And then for my PhD, I worked in the Himalayas, where I studied the elevation distribution of birds. That's something that I'm really interested in. I continue to do here at the Smithsonian. But for the last 4 years now, I've been associated with another project that I did research on in California, in the United States. And it's this really boring looking place called the Hastings Natural History Reservation. It is oak savanna woodland in California, in central coastal California. And it's the site for one of the longest running studies of any wild bird in the world, which is the Acorn Woodpecker. And that's an Acorn Woodpecker for you guys. So humans, like many other animals, are social animals. So sociality is not restricted to humans, as I'm sure you must know. But sociality is seen even in unicellular organisms like these volvox, which show aggregations of cells together. But we know of aggregations more commonly as flocks of birds or herds of cattle or herds of humans. We walk around together, often go to the same place, often go to the same cricket matches as one aggregation, but we don't have a lot of contact with one another. So there's very little inter-individual connections in aggregations. But there are a lot of animals around the world that have that live in what we call family groups, right? So these yellow-billed babblers, for example, live in family groups. Wolves live in family groups. Does live in family groups. There are a lot of spiders that live in family groups. Earwigs live in family groups. So this whole idea that, or the fact that animals live in families has evolved independently multiple times throughout the tree of life. So family living is not restricted to humans. It's evolved many, many times, again and again, repeatedly at different points in at a time of evolution. So the bird behind me, the acorn woodpecker, also lives in family groups, and I'll tell you more about that soon. So let's talk about how family living birds live. And family living is also what is called cooperative breeding. That's the scientific term for it. And cooperative breeding is seen in about 9% of all birds. So 9% of all the 10,000 or 11,000 species that, of birds there are live in a family group. And here we define family group as a group where more than two birds, one male and one female, take care of the young in the nest. Okay, and so it's at least three parents taking care of a young one in the nest, and where the third obviously cannot be the biological parent of the chick, of the nestling. And again, family within birds also, family living has evolved many, many different times. So ostriches, hoatzins, which are these like really, really crazy birds that live in the Amazonian rainforest, the only leaf-eating bird in the world, hoatzins, babblers, woodpeckers. There are endless number of birds around the world that live in family groups. So the problem with that is that Charles Darwin, in 1859, in his magnum opus of evolution by natural selection, said that the only way that fit organisms are the ones that leave behind many, many copies of their DNA. Okay, and Darwin suggested that DNA has to be your offspring. So you leave behind many copies of your DNA, and many of the organisms that leave behind many offspring influence how evolution happens, right? And so if certain animals are able to leave behind many more offspring than other kinds of organisms, then the future generations will look more like those individuals. So this produces a paradox, because when you are that third individual, which is not the biological parent of the nestling, you are not directly passing on your DNA to the next generation. Then why does this evolve? Why is this beneficial for populations and for individuals to take care of a nestling that is not directly related to you, right? So the basic concept in the evolution of natural selection is, by natural selection, is fit individuals leave behind more babies. And we measure, even today, evolutionary biologists measure fitness of individuals as the number of babies they leave behind. But the question is whether babies or your offspring are the only organisms that share your DNA. So one of the first questions I want to ask you, and you can type the answers into your chat window, is who else shares your DNA with you? And or who do you think shares your DNA? And if you can type some answers, I don't want to hear them. You can mute your microphone, but if you can type your answers into the chat box, then we can get a feel of how much do you think you share your DNA with, or with whom? Anand, you're muted, I think.
So,
Pooja says viruses. Shirish Joshi says with similar species.
Mm-hmm.
Maitreya says chimpanzees 99%.
Mm-hmm.
Ajit Rao says uncles, aunts, cousins, other relatives.
That's
Kuldeep
wonderful.
Matre says relatives.
Excellent. Okay.
Rajesh Dubey
So,
says virus.
MS says family. Yeah.
That's great.
Shah
So
says our kids, siblings.
okay, wonderful. So that's good. So you guys know none of those answers are wrong, because we share DNA with everything from our parents and our siblings and our kids to viruses, as someone rightly pointed out. There are definitely some genes that we share with some viruses as well. And so the next question then is, how much DNA do you share with your brothers and sisters or cousins, nieces and nephews and grandchildren? Okay, so instead of asking you this directly, let me ask you this: how much DNA do you share with your kid or your offspring? Offspring is a little more scientific, but you know what I mean.
In
And
percent.
so, sorry?
In percent, right?
Yes, in percent or in a proportion. That's fine. I can.
So Shirish and Pooja says half. Deepak Gurjar says 98%. Somebody says 25 to 50%. That's Dr. Tucker. Akshay says 99.5%. Ajit Rao says 70 to 80%. Shujan says 49 to 50%.
Great.
Rahul
So,
says 90%.
so the correct, I mean, the
says 50.
Null answer to that question is about 50%, right? So when you have a kid of your own, when you're the biological parent, you have contributed half of the DNA in the kid with your sperm or egg, and so you share 50% of your DNA with your kid. And so similarly, because your direct siblings or your real brothers and sisters are also the biological kids of your mother and father, then that's why they share 50% of your DNA as well. Or rather, you share 50% of your DNA with your brother and or your sister. And you can take this forward across many levels. So you share about 25% of your DNA with your sister's or brother's kid, right? Your niece or nephew. You share 25% of your DNA with them. And you share 0.125%, so 12.5% of your DNA with your first cousin, so your uncle's kid. and so on and so forth. And you can probably measure how much DNA you share with William Shakespeare, with Shivaji Maharaj, with Tipu Sultan, with Napoleon Bonaparte also, if you had the time and knew the math. So let's go ahead, and then let's go back to evolution and say that your prime objective is to leave behind as many copies of your DNA in the gene pool as possible. So if you want to, let's start with replacing yourself in the gene pool, right? That you want to leave behind at least one full copy of your genome in the gene pool after you die or after you stop reproducing. How many kids or offspring do you need to have to replace yourself in the gene pool? What is the answer to that? If you share 50% of your DNA with your parents and with your kids, then how many kids do you need to have to replace yourself in the genome, in the gene pool?
Okay, Punyan says 2, Rajesh Dubey says 2, Shrujan says 1, Pooja says 4, Dr. Thakkar says 4.
Okay, great. So
Sahas, there's another question that Deepak has asked. He's asked that do we share our DNA with any other species as well?
Yes, we share our DNA with, so we share our DNA with most, many other animals. There are very few parts of the DNA that are only human. And that's why we can use genetic techniques like to sequence any animal on Earth. So we can use the same DNA to sequence most animals on Earth. Anyways, going back. So
Shirish's answer is interesting. He says, no matter how many offsprings I make, I can only share half of my DNA.
Right, exactly. So given the fact that you share only 50% of your DNA with your offspring, you would need 2 offspring to replace yourself in the gene pool, right? Or you can take care of 2 siblings and then you're still replacing yourself in the gene pool. You don't have to have 2 offspring. You can have 2 siblings and make sure that you take care of them, and then you're replacing yourself in the gene pool. Or you can take care of 4 nieces or nephews, and you're still replacing yourself in the gene pool. So having this whole idea that you don't have to have your own kids to increase your fitness is something that is called kin selection, and that was really groundbreaking, actually, like population genetics in the 50s, which completely changed how we think about fitness and what we think about fit organisms, and how sociality or social lives of organisms have evolved. So if not anything, I want you to take away from this presentation that the fact that you share 50% of your DNA with your parents, with your kids, and with your brothers and sisters, and that if you have 2 siblings, you've already been replaced. If you have 4 nieces and nephews, you've already been replaced, and so on and so forth. And if you have 8 first cousins, you've also already been replaced in the gene pool. And so all your kids are on top and extra of that. Okay, so let's take this forward. So I'm going to talk today about how sociality evolves in acorn woodpeckers. And acorn woodpeckers are these beautiful clown-like birds that live in California, but are found all the way down into northern Colombia. So they're found across the western and central, western United States and Central America. Anand, can you tell me how far we are away from logging off and joining again?
Yeah, so we have 2 minutes and 45 seconds before we log off. So
okay.
Everyone, just a quick reminder that please log in with the same ID that we've given you. In about 2 minutes, this session will finish, and then we'll start off with the next session. So please log in with that. Any questions you want to take before?
No, let me just introduce one quick slide.
Yes, sure.
And so the whole study of acorn woodpeckers started with this simple observation that there were more than 2 birds feeding nestlings. So this was a paper that came out in the early 1900s, where someone looked at an acorn woodpecker nest and realized that there were more than 2 birds taking care of the nestlings. And back then in the 1900s, it was considered that in animals there is no sociality, or the fact that only one male and one female take care of the nestlings. And so this was a really interesting finding in acorn woodpeckers, that more than 2 birds take care of the nestlings. In 1968, in the place where we study acorn woodpeckers now, Hastings Reservation, one person named McRoberts did a study and realized that these extra birds that are taking care of the nestlings are in fact offspring from the previous generation. So they are actually their older brothers and sisters taking care of their siblings. And this was another cool finding. And this is what led to the 50-year-long study of cooperative breeding in this bird. And so let's go log off and come back on maybe, and I'll tell you more about what we've done in the last 50 years.
We have a minute more, Sahas. So there was a question which Pooja has asked, whether acorn woodpeckers are sexually dimorphic.
Yes, they are sexually dimorphic. The females have a black forehead and the males have a red forehead. But otherwise, they're very, other than that, they're pretty monomorphic.
So for those who are not familiar with these words, monomorphic is where the male and the female look similar, and dimorphic is where both the genders look different. Yeah. There could be multiple morphs also in some species, in some cases of animals. But in these cases, there are 2. Male and females have different morphs. Sometimes juveniles have a different color morph also. Or there are darker color morphs, lighter color morphs that are also existing. So then they could be considered polymorphic. Hi, Mr. Kate. Hi, Kuldeep. Jyoti. Hi, Kitu. Rahul, Rujuta, Shashank Dalvi. Hi, Minal. Forty-eight people. Prathamesh, hi. Okay, I think Sahas, you can continue because.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And you can hear me, right? Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So and you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
The presentation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So we were talking about this simple observation that someone made in the early 1900s that there were more than 2 birds that were feeding nestlings. And in 1968, McRoberts found out that these extra birds that were feeding nestlings were actually older siblings. And as I'm sure you are thinking, this was really, really cool information back then, because here was an animal that was very, very, very distantly related to us, but was still showing a very human social system, right? Where older siblings are taking care of younger siblings. But back then, this was a very revolutionary thought that an animal would forego breeding. So these are birds, these what we call helpers. These older siblings are what we call helpers. And these helpers are sexually mature adult birds. And they are foregoing breeding on their own to take care of their siblings. Okay. So this was a really, really revolutionary finding back in 1968, that there were these woodpeckers that otherwise we think of as really, bird-brained, but were showing this really complicated social system where older older siblings were foregoing breeding independently and increasing their copies through direct reproduction, but instead helping their parents raise more siblings. And this whole idea was then supported by what we just talked about, the fact that because your siblings have the same relatedness to you as your own kids, the the hypothesis was that there is some ecological constraint that keeps these offspring from dispersing and breeding independently. So dispersal is a word that we use in ecology to suggest moving away from your parents' territory. And so in tigers, for example, kids, when they reach about 2.5 years old, they disperse to start their own territory. But here, helpers don't disperse, and the hypothesis was that there was some ecological constraint that they couldn't disperse, and instead of having their own kids, they were having they were helping raise siblings which have the same relatedness to them. So they are increasing their own fitness by raising siblings instead of having their own kids. Does that make sense to everyone? I can't actually see if you can type quickly, because I don't know. This is not the easiest concept to wrap your head around, but
So individual fitness versus the fitness of the clan or the group.
no, it's
Or the
individual fitness
species.
versus it is individual fitness versus individual fitness. You can
Okay.
increase your individual fitness by raising siblings or by raising kids, and you get the same amount of fitness by doing either of those two things. So if you can't breed or reproduce on your own, you can raise your siblings and you are still increasing your fitness with the same amount. Okay.
I think
So
almost everyone says got it.
okay, great. So all the research that I'm going to talk to you about today took place in this place, the Hastings Reserve in Carmel Valley, California, and it's about there in the United States, in central coastal California, and it's been led by this guy Walt Koenig, who started research there in 1970, and there has been over 200 people have worked on this project, including me, and I only started in 2017. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about literally hundreds of thousands of hours of data collection in the field.
So Sahas,
let's
can
go
I
back.
throw in a question or two
Mhm.
which people have?
Sure.
One question was that why wouldn't they be able to breed? Second was that so that they copy their DNA and still increase their fitness. Shashank Dalvia said just like brown hornbills, and Pooja had asked whether the other individuals completely give up their opportunity or right of nesting.
Great.
So do you want to comment on that?
Those are great questions. So I will answer the first question the last, because that is a very big question, why they don't disperse or what stops them from dispersing. But yes, as Shashank pointed out, brown hornbills, jungle babblers, yellow-billed babblers, probably dark-fronted babblers, a bunch of birds in India, little green bee-eaters, small green bee-eaters, they're all cooperative breeders. So India has many species of cooperative breeding birds. Finally, why most helpers actually disperse eventually and start breeding on their own. So it's not that they completely forego their, but I will come to that also. I will come.
Yeah, I was going to say that. And you proceed, and if we yet have these questions, we'll take them at the end.
So let's go back, and so I told you that the basic breakdown of a group is that there are these two breeders and one or many more helpers, right? So the helpers are offspring of the breeders, and they all take care of the nestlings in the nest every breeding season. So the question then was, do helpers feed nestlings as much as adults do, right? Because they have an equal stake in the fitness because they share their DNA equally with these nestlings as the breeders. Do the helpers feed the nestlings as much as the adults do? And then does helper provisioning increase the number of nestlings that the group fledges, right? So if your mother and father together can raise 2 chicks, if you are helping to make a positive difference, you should be able to help raise more chicks than your parents can just by themselves, right? That makes sense. So so these were the 2 big questions back in the 1970s, and this is what Walt Koenig originally started wanted to answer. And so then we set off on this long-term collection of data that is going on even today as we speak right now, or well, in about 2 hours from now, someone in California will get up and go out and watch these birds. And the daily sort of bread and butter data that we get is every day, at least 2 field assistants pack up the lunch and spotting scopes and blinds, and they go out and sit in these blinds and watch woodpeckers that are color banded. So they individually identify they're part of which groups, and they follow the group composition by identifying individual birds sitting in blinds, looking through scopes like that. Then in every breeding season, we find the nest of every group. So we follow about 50 such social groups, and at least 50. And we find the nest of each of those 50. And we, so do you see that big yellow thing that Russell there is trying to put in the nest of a woodpecker? There's a camera at the end of that yellow stick, and we count the number of eggs and the number of nestlings that are in the nest using a camera. So you don't have to climb into the tree to see how many eggs and nestlings there are. But every year we find every nest of every group. At the end of, on day 21, we actually climb into the nest and take out the nestlings. And woodpecker nestlings are really cool because they hang on to you just like woodpeckers do. They hang on to your shirt. So if you see here, those are acorn woodpecker nestlings on Hannah's shirt right there. And then we band those nestlings. So we put a unique color combination of color bands on each nestling so we can identify that bird again. And right now, over the last 54 years, we have tracked over 6,200 birds individually. We know for those about 6,200 birds, we know exactly when they were born, which group they were born, how many parents there were, how many helpers there were, where the bird went eventually, how long did it live, how many kids it had of its own, etc., etc. So, I don't know what those 2 yellow lines are, but that's really weird. Anyway, so we have followed over 1,300 nests of acorn woodpeckers, and we have tracked the provisioning rate of over 2,000 birds at those 1,300 nests. And the big burning question was, do helpers help, right? Do helpers increase their own fitness by helping raise many, many offspring? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. There is no effect of helpers on how many chicks the group produces. And so only in really, really high resource years do the helpers have a positive effect on how many chicks the group raises. So that was a bummer. That took about 35 years of data collection with not a lot of, with not the answer that they were looking for. But then it sort of asked another really important question, right? Is then how else the helpers might be helping? I'm really annoyed by this. What is this? Hold on 1 second. Huh. So bizarre. Can you see that yellow line also, Anand?
Yes, yes.
I have no idea how that came, but I'm going to keep playing through it, so don't mind me. So the next question was, how do helpers help, right? If they're not helping raise their own siblings, then how are they helping the group in any way? So another cool thing that acorn woodpeckers do is they build these huge acorn granaries, okay? So acorn granaries are these structures that they build in dead or in the bark or dead wood, where they store individual acorns in the winter as a larder. Just like we have go downs of food, they have go downs of food as well. And each of those holes that you can see is filled with an individual acorn, and each of those holes takes about 30 minutes to make. So you're looking, some granaries can take hundreds of thousands of hours to make and accrue over decades of work by acorn woodpecker groups. So having a granary this big is exactly like being born into a Tata or a Birla family, where you have been accruing wealth for generations of your family. So one question that we are asking right now is, maybe the helper's role in this whole thing is what is this? Why is this happening? Okay, I'm going to stop the presentation and start again. Okay.
Yeah, you can just go out and come back again. So Sahas, in the meanwhile, there were a few questions.
Sure. Yeah.
While you do that,
Mm-hmm.
One is that, do you collect any DNA, RNA data when you are tagging the chicks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have. Go ahead.
Yeah. Also, do siblings think that by destroying the nestlings, they may get a chance to breed themselves? Is there a thought of that kind?
That's a fantastic.
Okay. The third thing is that what is the lifespan of an acorn woodpecker, and do the helpers just stick to the nest because they are not confident of nesting themselves? What are the?
So the first question is that we do collect DNA data from these birds, and the average
yellow
acorn
seems to be on your background as well.
Yeah, it's really weird. Okay, I'm gonna
just
stop
don't
sharing. Stop sharing the screen for a second and put it on this main screen. Okay. Okay. Bring this guy back. Here we go.
Right.
Okay, now can you see?
Yes.
My screen? Excellent. But can you see it in presenter mode or?
No, it's in, make it in full screen mode. It's not in.
How about now?
Yeah. No, back again.
I'm so sorry. Okay, how about now?
Not yet.
Come on.
Yep. Now we're
okay, great. Okay. The average lifespan of a acorn woodpecker is about 5 years. So if you're talking about a granary that takes 20 years to build, that is exactly like having bought into like whoever Ratan Tata's next successor is. So Jamshedji Tata, and then GRD Tata, and then Ratan Tata, and the fourth generation. So these birds are building these huge granaries that are exactly like having a huge wealthy bank balance. And so the idea is that something that we are studying right now is that these helpers that may not directly affect how many kids they are having on their own. That's my cat passing by. But they might be helping make these granaries, and they might be helping collect acorns and defend the granary from other groups that might want to come and steal the acorns, right? So that's something that we are thinking or that we are collecting data for right now as well. But let me tell you a little more about this high value property, right? So in 1985, there was a lady called Sue Hannon who worked on acorn woodpeckers in the same place. And she realized that whenever there was a breeding vacancy, so whenever there was a chance for a male or a female to move into one of these high value properties, there was what was called a power struggle. A power struggle is one of the most complicated and like socially complex animal behaviors in the world. What that means is that coalitions of woodpeckers, so 3 or 4 birds from different social groups, come and fight one another until one group beats all other groups. So it's a multi-way conflict, physical conflict. So these are birds that are fighting each other very violently, where birds, you can see birds with their eyes gouged out, with their wings bleeding, birds fall to the ground fighting. It's I don't know if any of you guys watched like World Wrestling Federation matches when you were a kid, but it's like a tag team cage match where all one group is trying to beat all other groups, and these intense fights actually last for many days. And so you can tell how much how valuable these properties are. And so power struggles are like an absolutely wonderful phenomenon in nature. And we realized that that granaries are thus a very important resource for these birds. Now, another thing that Sue Hannon found in 1985 is that big coalitions win. And so if you're a big group of birds, you are more likely to win a power struggle than if you are fighting alone, right? It's a numbers game. But that also means that, and here I'm going to complicate the acorn woodpecker social system a little more, is that many groups, especially these high value property groups with big granaries with thousands and thousands of holes, are not your simple 2 breeders and their helpers, but they actually have a much more complicated social system with many breeders of both many males and many female breeders, and many male and female helpers all living together. Okay, so it's like it's what is called a polygynandrous social system with non-breeding helpers. So let's take the helpers out for the time being. And what these birds are doing is what is called cooperative polygamy. Now, polygamy has recently become very famous because of Tiger King. I don't know if you've watched it, but polygamy is common in nature, and acorn woodpeckers do a very complicated kind of polygamy where multiple males and multiple females all have one communal nest. So in human systems, many human systems, even though you might live in a joint family where 2 brothers might have their families in the same house, but they have their kids separately. In acorn woodpeckers, multiple brothers will mate with females and have and those females will lay a communal nest, and everyone raises the chicks together. Okay, so this was a really cool system that was discovered in the 80s, and the Acorn Woodpecker Project was one of the first to use a large genetic parentage data to understand how this comes about. Because again, if you're thinking from an evolutionary point of view or Darwinism point of view, then despite the fact that these 6 birds here are having a communal nest, the struggle should be to maximize individual fitness, right? So every individual here is trying to have as many babies as they want, as they can in this communal nest. So Joey Haydock in 1998 and onwards has shown that there's very strong competition within each individual, within a communal nest, to have the most babies in a communal nest. So there is strong competition. And another paper that I published last year and something that's in prep is showing that cooperative polygamy is actually really bad for females. Females lose a lot of direct fitness by having a communal nest, which means that if a female is breeding alone, she can have many more babies than if she breeds with her sisters in a communal nest. The results for males are a little more complicated than that, and I'm not going to get into that yet. But going back, these woodpeckers not only have a really cool thing where offspring from previous years stay back and help raise siblings, but also there is cooperative polygamy where brothers will gang up, will breed together with females, and the females are also closely related to each other. So the females in the breeder females in the group are siblings also. So another thing that is important to remember is that even if you're competing with your brother to have chicks in the communal nest, your brother having some offspring gives you fitness as well, right? Because because your nieces and nephews share 25% of your DNA. So you can have the communal nest generally has some of their own DNA, some of their own offspring, and some first nephews and nieces, which is, so they get a lot of what is called inclusive fitness from these communal nests. So thanks for, hope that was not completely impossible to comprehend, but you can ask me questions later. Let me go back. So these power struggles, where this all starts, where like 50 birds are fighting with each other until one group beats all other groups, starts in minutes of the breeding vacancy being available. Okay, so as soon as the breeders at a high quality site die, within minutes there are birds fighting, and birds visit from over 4 kilometers away. So other birds in groups living 4 kilometers away hear about these fights and come and fight with their groups, with their relatives to become a breeder there. So it is really crazy to see that a bird that has the brain, which is probably a 10th our size, has the social capability of getting information kilometers away and reacting to it and coming to the same, to finding a place and then fighting there. So the question is, how do birds find out that there's a power struggle happening in the first place? One answer is that birds might be flying around all the time, right? And they fly around and they hear all the commotion that's happening, and then they go in closer to find out, and then they go back and get their brothers and sisters to come and fight. So we wanted to understand how often birds are flying outside their territories. So for the last 3 years, and this is something that I have contributed to the project, is we have set up this radio tag system where we put these tiny radio tags, which are completely solar powered. So they're ultra light. Each of those radio tags weighs about 0.5 grams. They go on the back of the acorn woodpecker. So here you can see an acorn woodpecker in the photo with the radio tag on its back. The tags are picked up by these autonomous solar powered receivers. And this is what the receiver looks like inside. And we have about 45 receivers spread out over our 1,000 hectare or 2,500 acre study area. So we can track all birds continuously and simultaneously. So this is giving us another very large data set to play with. We have over 150 birds tagged, and we have over 500 million detections of birds so far in the last about 2 years. And with that, we are asking more advanced questions of, do helpers spend a lot of time on home territory defending the granary, or are they going around, flying around to find these power struggles where they can inherit or join a high quality group? But we are asking more complicated questions than that as well. we are asking questions about whether woodpeckers have friendships outside their group. So do woodpeckers go and associate and meet their friends that live in other territories, just like we go and meet friends from our friends who have their own families, right? But we know we have personal connections with other individuals in our society. So do acorn woodpeckers have friendships outside their group as well? And finally, do acorn woodpeckers live in complex social networks like we do? Do they have groups? Do they have a organization like Sprouts, where we belong to very completely different families, but we have a common organization called Sprouts that we all relate to and work for and work with? And so we are taking, finally, we're taking a close look at how social networks evolve in animals as well. So I want to sort of close, so we have enough time for questions, but to close with the fact that a simple observation that happened in the early 1900s, that more than 2 birds were feeding chicks at a nest, 50 years later has been an outstanding study on the role of helpers in reproduction, the evolution of cooperative polygamy, and now will be a study that tells us what the mechanics of animal social networks are. So there is a lot of, once you start studying something, you can study it for 50 years and have questions to study it for the next 100 years as well. So long-term studies of birds are really, really important, and and similar studies like acorn woodpeckers have been really instrumental for understanding how birds behave and how bird behavior evolves in nature. So with that, I would like to thank my bosses, Walt, and the whole acorn woodpecker crew. And I will take any questions.
Yeah. So Sahas, a few questions, if I can start off, and then there are a few more lined up.
Sure.
All the audience, you can please type in your questions also. So one question is that, has the methodology of study changed over the 50 years, or have you all kept the questions primarily the same and the methods or technological differences that are there, how that has affected the study?
That's great. That's a great question. We try to keep the methodology as consistent as possible, because then that keeps the data comparable to each other. So there are some methods of how we census birds, how much effort we put into measuring the provisioning rates and stuff like that, that is set, that we don't change, but we always incorporate new technology. So this whole radio tag technology is completely new, and we have incorporated into our daily data collection now. So yes and no. Some things that we want to continue studying for the next 20 years, we just collect like we have been for the last 20 years.
Okay. A few questions that have come. Pooja has asked whether females, like you mentioned, that they have a problem, they don't do well with polygamy. So is it that they prefer monogamy but they have to deal with polygamy? I'll give you the questions and you can answer them as a bulk.
Sure.
The second question by Shirish is, there are any cooperative polygamous birds in Bombay? Adesh has asked, do they breed amongst the same gene pool? And Pranad asked, okay, they are interrelated questions.
Yeah, so I'll answer.
We first take these.
First 2 questions. Thank you for those questions, by the way. Yeah, so the polygamy works in females is another crazy story, because when birds start laying an egg, if there are, let's say there are 2 females that are having a joint nest together, the female that lays the first egg has a huge advantage to her chicks, because her chicks will hatch out faster or hatch out earlier, and will be the dominant chicks in the nest. So what acorn woodpeckers actually do, what acorn woodpecker females do, is if female A lays an egg, but female B is not ready to lay an egg yet, she picks up her sister's egg and throws it outside. So she destroys the egg. So they do what is called egg tossing, and she will keep tossing her sister's eggs unless she is ready to start laying her eggs of her own. And then, so let's say female A lays an egg, female B tosses it out. female A lays an egg, female B tosses it out, then female A is like, okay, my sister is not ready to have her own eggs yet. So she generally waits for female B to start laying an egg, and then she starts laying an egg. So that's how they maintain equity. But because this egg tossing is very, very costly for the females, they end up having less chicks than a monogamous female. Why they live in polygamous systems is probably because the number of good nest cavities in the habitat is limited. And so not every female can have a monogamous nest.
Right. Yeah, go on.
Can you repeat Adish's question again? That was really interesting.
Adish's question was that one is that do they breed amongst the same gene pool? And then he had a continuing question that if not, then how do they find mates from other clans?
Great. So the let's talk about these power struggles again. At the power struggles, generally the only one of the two breeder vacancies is being filled. So the males are already there. The females are being filled in the power struggle, or the females are already there and the males are being filled. And so the breeders that are already there get unrelated birds moving in, and so they breed within. That's how they increase the diversity. But it is important to remember that, like humans, even 150 years ago, these birds that are the new breeders, unrelated birds, actually live really, really close to them. So the average relatedness between any two birds at the Hastings Reserve is about 0.2. So they generally breed with their second or third cousin, which is not very different from human societies 150 years ago, when we often married someone from the same village or from two villages over. It is the same phenomenon.
So Pranad had a bunch of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sahas, if you stop sharing your screen, then you can be on the spotlight and people can.
Sure.
Yeah. So his question was that, sorry, 1 second. Have nests been recorded without the helpers? Do older offsprings chase off parents once they are old? Then what's the other one? What is the maximum number of individuals recorded in one group?
Sure. So the answer to the first question is that only 65% of the groups in general have helpers. So not all there are many groups that are only breeders, and many groups that are also just one male and one female. So it's not they are not obligate helpers. The second one, or just that their offspring might die and there might not be helpers in the second year. Right. The second question is that they don't chase their fathers or mothers away when they get old, but they can become co-breeders with them. So consider that you are a male helper and your dad is the breeder, and your mom, and the three of you live on a very high quality territory. Now when you have to wait for your opposite sex parent to die. So let's say if you are a male helper, that your mom dies and there's a power struggle, and if a unrelated female moves in, right? So this female is unrelated to you. Now both you and your dad become co-breeders. So you both breed with with the new female and have chicks. And so you don't have to drive your dad away. You just have to wait for your mom to die if you're a male.
And we have just a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
So there is one question, very interesting one by Kaushik. He's saying that how do they tackle inbreeding when they mate with cousins and siblings?
That's great. So that's a great question. So there's the inbreeding is measured as what is called an inbreeding quotient, and there is very, very strong controls against inbreeding. So there is very, very, very little. Only about 3% of woodpeckers actually have inbreeding directly with their mothers and fathers, or with their daughters and sons or daughters. And 3% is actually pretty comparable to what humans have also, by the way. So, they basically just have, they generally don't breed with their brothers and sisters or known relatives. That's the only way they keep breeding. Another question that was there originally, there are up to 8 co-breeding males and up to 4 co-breeding females, and groups can have up to 12 helpers. So we have had groups that are 18 birds in one group.
So we're going to be probably going back offline in 1 minute. So
I'm happy
please
to
everyone
keep taking
signing.
questions.
Yeah. So there are a whole bunch of questions which are there.
Sure.
Guys, everyone, please sign in with the same ID again. I'll read out the questions so that you can hold on to them. So in cooperative polygamy, is infidelity existing between pairs?
Okay.
And are there similar studies that you know of elsewhere? The other one was that do other woodpeckers also show something similar, or is it very specific to acorn woodpeckers?
Sure.
The second thing is that any species in Bombay that do cooperative, breeding that you can
Sure.
name?
Okay, sounds good. So ones in Bombay, probably jungle babblers and small green beater, Merops orientalis come to mind right away. I won't be surprised if common menas have some. So yeah, so going back, maybe I can start talking. Jungle babblers are a very, very common and long studied example, actually. A lot of babblers have cooperative breeding, and jungle babblers definitely do. Do all woodpeckers have cooperative breeding? No, most woodpeckers are simple pair breeders, but there are many species around the world that show cooperative breeding. Acorn woodpeckers are definitely one of them. But even great slaty woodpeckers, actually, that live in the Tarai of India, are cooperative breeders. So great slaty woodpeckers also have helpers at their groups. The cooperative polygamy, on the other hand, is very, very rare in birds, especially joint nesting females. So joint nesting females occur only in 8 birds in the world, or 8 groups of birds. So ostriches have joint nesting. Ostriches have joint nesting. Acorn woodpeckers have joint nesting. And there's this other bird, which was another question that someone asked, whether there's infidelity between group members in acorn woodpeckers. And there is very, very little infidelity outside the group. So let's say that there are 3 breeder males and 2 breeder females. All the chicks that are in the nest are biological offspring of one of those 3 breeder males and one of those 2 breeder females. Okay, so there is very little infidelity outside the group, but there is the idea is, like, the hypothesis is that no one knows which chicks are theirs. So the females know how many chicks they laid, but the males don't know which of those chicks are theirs. And so the males then always make a point to feed all the chicks just as if they are their own chicks. Okay, and there was one experiment done where Walt actually when it was 1 breeder male and 2 breeder males and 1 breeder female in a group, and he caught one of the breeder males when the female was in estrus, was when she was ready to be mated with, and so he basically made sure that only one of the breeder males actually got parentage. And when he released the second male, he went and destroyed all the eggs. So as soon as they know that they have no role or no contribution to the nest, they will destroy eggs.
A whole other bunch of questions. One is that whether there is any correlation with weather that has been found, and about polyandry as well. Is there polyandry? So
so polyandry, absolutely. So the first question is if there's a correlation between weather and cooperative breeding, and the answer is yes. There is a pretty strong correlation, which may not be causation, but there's a strong correlation between really, really dry and highly seasonal environments and the evolution of cooperative breeding. So there are more cooperative breeders in desert habitats, for example, where there is very little good quality habitat, and the good quality habitat is spread out over a huge landscape. So cooperative breeding is supposed to have evolved as a way of, when each individual bird or animal cannot have their own territory and cannot breed on their own, they help raise their siblings to increase their fitness in nature.
So related question, Sahas,
Mhm.
was that the acorn woodpeckers look very different than all other types of woodpeckers. So do they have a separate evolutionary origin, or what is it? The root.
No, so acorn woodpeckers actually are very closely related to. So they belong to this genus called Melanerpes, and Melanerpes actually is a widespread genus in North and South America, and there are many birds that look very similar to acorn woodpeckers. Actually, it's just that none of those woodpeckers are found. None of that genus is found in India. I don't think any Melanerpes is found in India, although I might not be wrong. Shashank might know. So.
Doctor has a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do females outnumber males?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and yes, we actually last year we had a group that I banded the chicks for. There were 4 females and 1 male, and that he was a pretty happy male, I'm sure, because he had the monopoly of all the eggs for those 4 females, and they produced 16 eggs. Those 4 females had a communal nest of 16 eggs, and 8 of those chicks made it to, like, fledged out of the nest. So that male replaced himself 4 times in that one single nest. So yes, so Pranav asked a question about the word formivorous, which means anteater, and that's absolutely right. So the formivorous means anteater, and they do eat ants, but acorn woodpeckers and Lewis's woodpeckers, which are very closely related to acorn woodpeckers, also are really cool because they are aerial insectivores. So most of their food is actually sitting at the top of a tree and flying out, just like bee eaters, and sallying for big insects. So you'll see them sitting on the top of an oak tree and flying 100 feet in the sky to catch a crane fly and then eating it. And that's exactly why the whole granary system has evolved in acorn woodpeckers, is because in California, where they live, in the winters, it's dry and wet. And so there are very few, when it's cold and wet. It's cold and wet, and there are very few flying insects. And so they store food in the fall, in the autumn, so that they can eat that when there are no flying insects.
The other question was, are there any woodpeckers in the Himalaya that have a practice of maintaining granaries?
No, but there was actually a paper in the JBN most recent edition of JBNHS, which suggested that Himalayan woodpeckers actually store food. So there is very little data actually on whether Himalayan birds do that or not. And so many of you naturalists can go out and observe birds instead of moving on to the next species. Keep observing the same bird for many minutes, and you might discover new behavior. And so there's a lot unknown about Indian birds, but we do know that many Indian birds, especially ones that are found in India also and outside, have a habit of storing some food. Whether that it is at the scale of granaries or not is probably we don't know, but it is unlikely. Otherwise, somebody would have seen a big acorn granary somewhere.
So you want to explain about polyandry?
Sure. So polyandry is also common in nature. So jacanas show polyandry.
So in case of
acorn woodpeckers.
Acorn woodpeckers, do they? Yeah.
So yeah, there's cooperative polyandry in acorn woodpeckers. Actually, cooperative polyandry is common in acorn woodpeckers, where polyandry means there are more breeder males than breeder females in a group. And so many groups have a ratio where there are more males breeding than females, and it's just the males don't know which of the chicks are their own, so they take care of them just like as if their own babies. But also The worst that can happen is that you might not be taking care of your own chick, but you might be taking care of your brother's chick, which is
Right.
which is what we do also, right? So what we would do also. So yeah, polyandry is common.
Right. So one more question was that squirrels steal acorn nuts. So do helpers shoo away thieves?
Yeah, so a lot of different animals try to steal acorns from the granaries. Crows, jays, and squirrels and mice. A bunch of different animals try to, and the helpers are constantly trying to. All the helpers and the breeders are constantly guarding the granary tree. Even if you go close to a granary tree and start taking an acorn out, someone will come and peck at you. So they are pretty good like that. And that may be a very, very important function that the helpers do, is that they store granaries. The other cool thing that I didn't tell you about the granaries is that acorns come in different shapes and sizes, and each hole in the granary is meant for a specific species of oak. Now there are 4 species of oak that are common in our system in California, and each of those oak species produces a different shaped acorn. And so some acorns in the granary are meant for a certain species of oak versus others. The other thing is that the acorns, when they are first harvested by the birds, they are green and big, but when they store them in the granary, they dry out and become loose. And so then squirrels can take them out very easily. And so a lot of time that the acorn breakers spend doing is actually taking acorns out that are loose and putting them into another hole where they fit much better. So they're constantly maintaining their granary all the time. So you can see birds doing that, when you're out in any woodland in California.
Right. So Puryanch asked, what is the kind of nest that do acorns woodpecker make? And then there are 2 more questions, one from Shashank and one very interesting one by Deepak Gurjar.
Sure.
So you can,
yeah. So the acorn woodpeckers nest in cavities. So just like any other woodpecker in the world, they make a whole nest. And just like any other woodpecker in the world, they don't put a lot of nesting material inside the hole. Other birds like tits and nuthatches also make whole nests, but they make their own nest of moss and grass inside the hole. Acorn woodpeckers just line their nest with wood chips. So I'll take Deepak's question first. Why was the 50-year study necessary? And the short answer is because basic science this is basic science, and we a system like this where sociality has evolved independently is really interesting to scientists to fully understand, because we can manipulate different parts. So we can take out helpers. So there are all these experiments that I didn't talk about today, obviously, but you can manipulate the number of helpers, the number of breeders in a group, and see how many chicks they produce. And so here is an animal that we can manipulate that is very much like us. It has a social system very similar to us, but we can manipulate experimentally to see what are the effects of changing the number of parents in the group on how many kids are produced and all that. And so yes, 50 years is necessary, and probably another 100 years is also necessary. The next question is, if the documentation is stored digitally, of course, we have multiple copies in probably now on 2 different continents.
So where can they see or read about it? Can you share that?
Yeah. Sure. So most of the research has been published as scientific papers. So this research has resulted in more than 150 scientific publications. But there are some really cool popular articles on acorn woodpeckers that I can definitely send to you, Anand, and you can pass it on to other people.
On your website, do you have like a space where people can visit and see 50 years of work of the acorn woodpecker research?
Not really, because we haven't done that, but maybe I should start doing that.
Right. So there's a very nice question that Shashank has asked, is that are there any examples of birds or studies where non-related individuals share the same nest or mound like megapods do?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is sociality comes in many different flavors in birds. And so there are not only examples of birds like megapodes that share the nest. A lot of so in ostriches, for example, multiple females that are unrelated to each other lay eggs in the same nest, and they're all raised by the same male. There are even birds called so a famous example is a noisy miner bird that's found in Australia, where the helpers at the group that don't actually breed in the group are not even related to the parents. So there the hypothesis is that these birds sort of learn the skills of being an adult breeder by joining another group. So they become chelas of these other breeders, and they learn how to be an adult breeder by joining another group where they are not even getting any fitness by helping raise the chicks. So sociality, you can think of like some social system, and there's probably a bird doing it. So it's sociality is extremely diverse.
So I've got last three questions.
Mm-hmm.
That I have one question myself.
Mm-hmm.
So one is Kaushik has asked is that since they maintain granaries, are they territorial?
Yes. So they are territorial, but they 90% of the acorns that they store in the granary come from within 200 meters of their granary tree. So wherever their granary is, they bring 90 to 95% of the acorns from within 200 meters. So they have about a 200-meter radius granary around their radius territory around their granary. But it's not as, the territory is a big word, and it's not as strong a territory because they're so social as tigers or other animals. Just like we do, like we have territory. We can call our house a territory, but we let strangers into the house all the time, right? Or we let like people that we know, our friends, into the house all the time, and we even feed them. So just like we are social, they are social too.
So I'm going to combine two questions by Mr. Ghatia and Prevak,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically about the constraints for dispersal.
Sure.
Is it because the habitat is stressed, that's why they are cooperative breeders, and are they not constrained with the needs to disperse?
That's a great question, and that has sort of been the $1 million question for a long time: is why these helpers don't disperse. And yes, the answer is there is some ecological constraint. It's there are two things about it. One is that yes, there in the habitat there are fewer available territories than there are birds. Then there are pairs of birds available. So there are more birds than the system can handle, or the system can handle in a 2-bird system. Okay.
So if I can pause this here and say there are lessons for human beings to take, because we are almost in the same space now.
Yeah.
So as far as parenting is concerned, we can learn from these birds there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing is that birds that are born on really high quality territories often just wait to inherit their own territory instead of dispersing, right? So if you're born into a Tata or Birla family, why would you like leave your family and go start your own business, right? You would just join your dad's business. That makes the most sense for you. And that's what these birds do also. So birds that live on really high quality territories often don't disperse because they know at someday they'll inherit their parents' territory. And until then, they are helping raise siblings, which is the same as having their own kids anyways.
So I'll ask two last questions. I'll combine them again, and then I have one question. Sorry, friends, we have to stop at 7. So the question that Malini had asked, and with Kuldeep, I'm combining that, is that if there is one question that you want to ask a acorn woodpecker, what would that question be? And Kuldeep is asking that with the power struggles, what is it that the winners win, and what is it that the losers lose?
Sure, that's a great question. So I'll answer the second question first. With the power struggle, the winners win complete breeding rights to a high quality territory. Okay, and so they become the sole breeders at that territory. And if there was if there was a Ferrari that you could win, but you had to fight 8 other groups, would you fight like until you're black and blue to win a Ferrari for free? Is the question. acorn woodpeckers think yes. The can you repeat the first question again? Oh, what I would ask an acorn woodpecker? That's a great question. I would I would be one of those tricky people and say, can you give me 2 more questions? But I would ask, like, what if there is any decision process in the helper's head to decide whether they want to disperse and try and start a new territory or try and start a new family far away, or what is the decision process that goes behind a bird deciding to stay on that home territory and helping raise siblings versus going away? Because so again, something that I didn't mention is I would say about 35% of the birds leave their territory irrespective of whether they have found another territory or not, and they will go really far away. So some birds we know move up to 15 kilometers away from where they were born, and they keep flying around until they find a vacant territory. So but that is extremely dangerous because they don't know which predators they don't know cavities where they can sleep in and all that, and most of those birds end up dying. So
I have a last question, if I can.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is that this whole study that has been done, is it on one single protected space, or is there logging, removal, and is there dynamic changes that happen into that landscape? And have you all studied that kind of a system as to whether removal of, and then also whether logging and other things can have impact on distributions or carrying capacities of, how do they pack out then?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. So the whole study has taken place on a single, it's a biological research station run by the University of California, Berkeley. It's also, it's called the Hastings Natural History Reservation, and you can look it up online. It's called Hastings Natural History Reservation in Carmel Valley, California. There has been no habitat changes that humans have done, but nature itself is changing, right? And so the tree communities have been changing because the place was a cattle ranch first, and after that, about 1920s, they they made it into a biological research station. So all the cattle were removed from the area, and this is about a 2,500 acre what was a ranch, but now is a reserve.
100 years from that, we are seeing the results now.
Yeah, so so zero cattle for the last 100 years, and the vegetation has completely changed. The number of oaks that have regenerated is tremendous, and so there are many more young trees, many more trees producing acorns, and that has resulted in many more acorn woodpecker groups. So over the last 40 years, we have seen, if you plot the number of acorn bearing trees and if you plot the population of acorn woodpeckers, there's a very, very strong correlation. So taking out cattle has resulted in more oak trees, more acorns, and has thus resulted in an increase in the, carrying capacity is a dangerous word, but has resulted in the increase of the carrying capacity of the habitat for acorn woodpeckers.
So if you're okay, Sahas, I'll allow one more question. Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. So the question was by Kaushik was that do you all sort of estimate hormonal levels between breeders and helpers? Is there any kind of, and is there dietary differences between the breeders and that's my addition? Any differences in diet between breeders and non-breeders or helpers?
Sure. So we don't know of any dietary differences. It's really difficult to study diet in birds because birds digest stuff so quickly, and so you can only get a snapshot of diet from the last few hours that a bird has eaten, and so it's really difficult to get understand diet very cleanly. But it doesn't look like there are big differences in diet. And the second one is, yes, we have done hormonal studies. There are some hormonal studies, but there's nothing special about them. Doesn't look like hormones or their cooperative nature affects their hormones. There's another question by Kuldeep, which is really interesting, is if there's hierarchy that between helpers? And
Right.
that's a fascinating question that we have no idea, but we are really excited to answer. And so we have the cool thing about having 50 years of data is we can actually, I can test today whether older helpers are better at helping or not, or whether older helpers are more successful when they do disperse. And these questions, as I'm sure, it's really cool that Kuldeep came up with this question, and these questions keep coming up, and there are very few studies in the world that have data to answer such questions robustly. And we need more long-term studies like these and especially for Indian birds, because there's literally nothing known about Indian birds.
So thank you so much, Sahas, and thank you so much everyone for joining on this webinar today. A big round of applause from everyone. Thank you. And yeah, I think this really shows that long-term studies, of course, new questions do get generated from this. I'd like to add that on 25th of April, we also have another presentation by Sachin Rai, and he's going to take us through a photographic journey of the world. This was a scientific journey, I would say, and I'm sure that the more we dig into it, there will be 100 odd questions. You can write into Sahas also. Sahas, would you like to share your email address?
Yeah. Right.
We can type it in.
Yeah.
So please do write in your questions. Do look up. He has his website, sahasbarve.com. You can also see his papers and publications over there. And you can follow him on Instagram at
Barve like survey.
Yeah, you can check on that. So 25th of April, we have another Earth Day talk by Sachin Rai, but the timing is different. It's at from 4 o'clock to 5:30. So please do sign in. And thanks again, Sahas, for taking this time out. And thank you, Smithsonian, again for doing the study and sharing it with us. We feel very privileged to be the first ones to be here.
Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you so much for all the amazing questions that you guys asked.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
And we'll see you soon on the 25th.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.